Hi, today I read the fifth contact report to you from Sunday, February the 16th, 1975, 19 minutes before midnight. Semjase, we have noticed that you are already trying to publicize our cause much faster than we had actually planned to. Nevertheless, we are glad about that and we have nothing against your rush. But it might have been better if you had still waited some time. Now this sounds like publicize our cause, like an easy thing, but I remember we put up an info stand in Lucerne for passers-by to see what we have in material, and that was in 2018 when I just arrived a few weeks before, or a couple months before here, and then I was thinking, do I want to be here? And maybe it's better to go. And then I thought, don't be a coward and stick to it now. And then nobody was really interested. So just a few people stopped by, and maybe one or two people talked to you. And because we don't approach people, it was just an info stand, and people were interested, they could look. But it's not like we are handing out material or so, because that would already be like missionary work or so, it takes quite a bit of courage to talk about Billy's material. Not that I'm a courageous person or so, but if you ever go public with Billy's material and show your face to it, you might feel some inner obstacles. So Billy was very courageous to publicize everything, the contact reports and also the photos, or the evidence, and knowing that he would be opposed very strongly, and even the attacks on his life, he knew all that about. Not every attack, of course, but that there would be attacks on his life. Billy, it seemed to me that I could already do the hard preparatory work, since this one certainly takes a lot of effort. Semjase, that is certainly true, because everything will not be very easy. There again, it's not very easy, but it will be very difficult, Fundamentally speaking, we also have nothing against it, because we want to leave everything to your own decision. And there it shows again that the player, and not like it is in our work space or at our works, usually our jobs, that we get orders and that's how you have to do it. And there's usually very little space for doing it your own way. And the player are not like that. They, if you get a job, then it's up to you how you do it. And it's the same with Billy. They don't impose anything on him unless there are certain rules also he has to abide to. That will be not too long later in 75 or 76 when he brought people to a contact. That is of course a no-no, and he had to stop that, of course. But otherwise, how he spreads the teachings, that is completely up to him. And earlier the creation energy teachings was called spirit teaching, or teaching of truth, teaching of spirit, teaching of life. And the word spirit was replaced not too long ago by the term creation energy. So now it's called creation energy teaching, and or teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life. And that's what it's about. That's just the mission, to spread that. And everybody who helps with that is kind of part of the mission, Billy, thanks. The trust of you and yours honors me. However, do you not expect somewhat too much of a good thing from me? Semjase, You have a healthy sense of humor. Billy, do you think so? Semjase, sure, because truthfully one can never really have too much confidence in you, because you always give your best and try to make the best of everything you approach. I can confirm that Billy really tries to do his best, but he's also not stuck in perfectionism or stuff like that. Because that can also be a big obstacle. If, let's say, for example, you want to write a book, and you can write it in 2 years, and then you dig deeper and deeper and deeper into details and more details, and in the end it takes you 7, 8, 9, 10 years to write this book. But it's just hardly better. Then you lost a lot of time. You could have written maybe another 2 books in that time period. So try your best and everything, and yeah, that's basically what's in life about. Also, whatever you do, try your best. And if you, let's say, start a business and it fails, okay, you tried your best, and maybe you change something the next time. It's gonna be better. But go for it and do it if you really want to do it. And yeah, but don't get stuck in perfectionism. Billy, you flatter me. Semjase, certainly not, because it is just the truth. Billy, already enough, Semjase, because certainly you did not come here so that we grapple with flatteries and the like. Again, Billy doesn't like flattery, and personality cults, and personality cults of any kind is repugnant to him. Like a thank you letter or so, or especially when people write, my life really changed to the better because of what you write, and my life really changed. It's and really to the better. That of course he's really happy to read. And or especially if people give examples or so, that they can see much clearer now, and their thinking may be improved and so on. That is of course very nice, but yeah, anything that goes towards like personality cult or a shrine or so, that would be totally ridiculous, and then you haven't understood it. So what it's about. And if in some cases, there's nothing wrong with writing a thank you letter or so, but if you're really serious, about your gratitude, then help spread the teaching, about the creation energy. But again, you cannot do that by proselytizing. Difficult word. So not like religions do that, and then you will see how difficult it is, because so few people are interested. And there you have to be careful then. That's when people are, when you kind of say something to friends or so, and they're not responsive, then forget about it, But you can start a YouTube channel like me, and talk about it. Yeah, so that helps, of course. Semjase, you're right, because just today I would like to tell you something that will not only interest you, but all human beings. It is a somewhat strange story, which will, however, stir up a lot of dust due to the interest of the human beings, because it sounds too fantastic for all those who have not yet discovered or developed their spiritual conscious-based thinking. Here you can also see, it didn't stir up that much dust, you know. So even they underestimated the ignorance of mankind or humankind. Unfortunately, intellectual greatness is not enough to be able to grasp the story. But especially intellectual human beings are in abundance on the earth. And of all people, they are often the ones who lack spiritual consciousness-based knowledge and who are therefore unable to muster understanding for the real and for the logic. However, in this context, also those are to be mentioned who are led into the unreal by religions and those who have made neither intellectual nor spiritual consciousness-based far progress. All of them are the most evil opponents of the truth, the real and the irrefutable creational logic. But their criticism and their denial of certain things distinguish them as human beings living in primitive foolishness. Earth humans who always claim to know everything better, but who are in truth more unknowing than the ape beings that populate your primeval forests. By the denial of facts or possibilities, they openly expose their consciousness-based limitedness and their primitivity. Billy, those are very hard words, Semjase, even though, in my opinion, they correspond to the full sad truth. That is the bitter truth. And there was a gorilla Coco that was taught sign language, and it learned 1,000 signs. And Billy told me about an Aboriginal people who had only 200 words. And so you can see that animals are much smarter than we give them credit to, and often much more gentle and than humans, and that also some humans of us have very primitive language skills and communication skills. And also in our society, even though of course we have a larger vocabulary, there are pathological know-it-alls who fall also in this category, like narcissists and psychopaths, and about 1%, I think they said, are psychopaths in our society or in global society. So she and the denial of the truth is so widespread, also in science. As for example, I mentioned speed of light. You know, that is like something is faster than the speed of light. Some scientists open up to that now, but it's still like a big obstacle for them to think that something can move faster than the speed of light, and that space travel or hyperspace travel and time travel is possible. That is still like it's contemplated, but not seriously considered, you know, by most scientists, that could be possible. Semjase, exactly, and you know that this is really so, and that this is in fact the case is proved by you yourself in your book, which you have dressed in much harder words. Billy, of course, because the truth can only be said in hard words, as diplomacy would be pure lie and would trivialize everything. I talked to Billy about it, and he said diplomacy is the art of lying, or the teaching of lying, and that is basically truth. It's not only wrapping it into nice words, you're also hiding the truth, you know. The truth is very often hard, but also liberating if you can sit out the fear that arises when you're confronted with the truth. There's this inner resistance, and if you can open your consciousness so much for a while that, you know, then you will, it's not fearful anymore. And yeah, it's this uncomfortable period that can be a few seconds, it can be a couple of minutes, can be even longer, you know. Sometimes it takes weeks or months to open your consciousness for a concept, you know. But in many cases it's not long. And if you open your consciousness and say, okay, why is that person saying that, or could this be true, you know, and try to do I find other information about it or so that substantiates that, and so on. So then you often discover, oh, there's something to it, you know. And so that is like key for everybody's life, to have an open consciousness. And even if Billy says something I'm not familiar with, then okay, then I have to have a look into it first, you know. So I'm not parroting his material or so. Yeah, for example, now they're propagating like dangerous aliens, and they might invade, and nonsense like that. And it's just to scare people. There are good aliens and there are not so good ones, or extraterrestrials. And if you really think about it, and you don't get carried away by the fear factor, the fear dissipates after a while. When you focus your consciousness on the real world, and suddenly you realize that our leaders and governments are a much greater threat to us and liberties and freedom than than aliens, you know. So don't get distracted by this this false narrative. Semjase, of course, you just have to ensure that you can make that understandable to the human beings. They have indeed already been weakened too much and become addicted to unreality to still be able to recognize and digest honest undiplomacy as truth. They have become weak and stunted in the thinking, acting and speaking, so that they rebel and defend themselves against everything that sounds like hard truth. But the truth can only be spread through firmness, just as peace can only be enforced through naked, gewaltsame Gewaltlosigkeit. So to translate that as violent non-violence is not really correct. That's why they also put in the word Gewalt, the German word Gewalt. It's the only translation that comes closest to it, violent non-violence, but it's a bit difficult to explain. But I will come to that in a moment. This kind of that the humanity becomes soft. That is true. Just to give you one example, when I was young, there were like if you were looking for a job, they rarely wrote that you must be able to do hard work, you know, and now it's very often people are not willing to work. In many cases, they are not willing to do hard work 5 days a week anymore, and and so you see that a lot when there are kind of ads for jobs or so, and yeah, so that there you can see that change, that people become softer in their consciousness, and also physically, that they can't do the hard work anymore. And this gewaltsame Gewaltlosigkeit is like the spoken word of truth. That's basically it. If it is non-violence, because you're not violent to a person, you don't scream it or so. But the violent or the gewaltsame part of it is that you speak the truth. And this truth is very often, especially in our world, on this planet, since we are so deceived and have so much lies and deception, that truth very quickly becomes harsh and hard to us. And that is perceived as a violent act, almost, you know. So to give you an example, I asked Billy about, could you compare like Gandhi's methods, that they were gewaltsame Gewaltlosigkeit, because Gandhi was it was very important to him that nobody uses violence or force by resisting. But simply the fact that they resisted has a violent component to it. And Billy confirmed, that is gewaltsame Gewaltlosigkeit. And this channel is also that. I will tell you stuff that you won't hear anywhere else. So just by reading the contact reports and then also commenting on it, there's what Semjase says is the harsh truth, but it's also very liberating if you allow it to think about it, and I'm sure you will see also that she's telling the truth. Billy, I know, unfortunately, but you told me something about a story you want to tell me today. What then is this story supposed to be? Does it have something to do with the human being, or is it simply an unimportant story? Semjase, I will let you decide about that, as well as all those to whom you will pass on this story. So it is supposed to be some kind of history of the humankind. Semjase, sure. Billy, well, then I'm curious, because I've thought about this a lot during all my lifetime. Semjase, I know, and you have found the truth or the approximate truth in many things. Of course, not all events and dates are precisely known to us, but we are largely informed about this. But listen to the story. Your earthly calculation of time is not very accurate and is only partly directed according to the facts. Your own calculations are not exactly correct either, but they are the most accurate ones ever calculated by a human being on the earth. Your calculations vary only by the trifle of about 200 years, while the calculations of your scientists and researchers show faulty times in the order of several thousand years. A fact that you can recalculate at any time based on my information that I will give you here. Many researchers of the Earth have been trying since ever to calculate the exact time of the flood known to you through the Bible, but so far without any noteworthy success. Indeed, according to today's Christian calendar, the flood took place exactly 10,079 years ago. It was triggered by a worldwide catastrophe of cosmic origin when a gigantic comet threw the Earth out of its orbit and changed its period and direction of rotation. At that time, one Earth day amounted to more than 40 hours, and the sun did not rise in the east like it does today. Such changes in rotation time and direction of rotation have affected the Earth 2 more times after the flood, but they have not brought such devastating catastrophes as with the mentioned flood. The last radical change of this kind took place 3,500 years ago, of which, however, I will speak later. The flood, 10,079 years ago, related to the year 1975, of course, was caused by a gigantic comet which has already caused a lot of damage and has been traversing the universe since time immemorial. We call it the destroyer, and we know that it has already been racing through outer space for millions of years. According to your calculation of time, this dangerous comet has an orbital period of 575.5 years, and in the year 2255 of your calculation of time, it will again enter the realm of the Earth in a very dangerous way, unless its orbit is changed or even destroyed by some cosmic circumstances or by our planned efforts. The last passage of this comet took place 295 years ago, calculated from 1975, namely in the year 1680. 10,079 years ago, this giant comet, which had originated from a natural cosmic catastrophe, got very close to the realm of the Earth and almost destroyed it. Only the knowledge and ability of our ancestors, who had settled on the Earth and had begotten their descendants here, prevented the terrible end. Also, in the following millennia, the giant comet has always been a great threat to the Earth, and it will remain so, too, until one day it will be destroyed or diverted away. So let me repeat that sentence again. Also, in the following millennia, the giant comet has always been a great threat to the Earth, and it will remain so, too, until one day it will be destroyed or diverted away. I think the destroyer has not been discovered yet, but what I found is like a comet of the size of 85 miles or something like that in diameter, but this one is much bigger. So I think it's about the size of the Earth even. So it's really giant. And so I think the destroyer has not been discovered by our scientists, but if you know anything to the contrary, let me know in the comments. The last major catastrophe that emanated from this comet was about 3,500 years ago, as I have already mentioned. To be precise, it was 3,453 years ago, according to your calculation of time. Due to this comet, an event took place which is very rare in the universe, namely a planetary transplantation. By the monstrous gewalt of this giant comet, a planet just developing life in a very distant planet system of the Solar System was flung out of its orbit and driven out into the outer space in a trajectory parallel to that of the destructive giant comet. For more than 100 years, this planet then trailed far behind the giant and deviated only infinitely slowly from its path. Then, 3,453 years ago, the destroyer penetrated the terrestrial solar system and brought the planetary orbits into disorder by its gigantic forces. Passing close to Earth, it enshrouded ladder in its huge tail and shook it very hard. Immense storms and volcanic eruptions were the result. Human beings and animals died in large masses, mountains were shifted, and the ocean depths changed. In the Mediterranean Sea, the magma walls of the Santorini volcano were torn to pieces deep down, and large quantities of water penetrated. This caused an immense catastrophe, since the volcano exploded thereby and destroyed the island. As I explained to you, Malona was a planet, and this whole planet was destroyed because they let water into a volcano, a very, very large volcano. And they diverted even, I think, ocean water, an ocean into a volcano, and a very big one. And that explosion destroyed the whole planet. So that's why she mentioned this here. This is very, very dangerous for a planet. The explosion created a gigantic storm surge which grew nearly 200 meters high into the sky and swept over the sea like a primeval monster. Everything in it was killed and crushed, and the water turned blood red. In Egypt, the storm surge flooded vast areas and caused all sorts of epidemics, while the tidal wave receded and continued racing northeast across the sea to destroy vast areas and all port cities on the eastern shore of the sea in the present-day Syria. The comet, however, shot through the terrestrial solar system and raced around the sun again off into the outer space to return in 575.5 years. But the slower following planet carried along in its wake, which was about the same size of the Earth, shot past the Earth at a distance of about 600,000 kilometers and was captured by the attraction force of the Sun. By its tremendous power, it forced the new planet into an orbit between its closest satellites, namely between Mercury and the Earth. And since then, this transplanted and immigrated planet has been known to the Earth humans, and he calls it Venus. So that's how Venus was brought by the destroyer, the comet, into our solar system, and Venus was then captured by the Sun. Billy, fantastic, Semjase. Semjase? Sure, but I am not finished yet, because I want to tell you even more primordial things now. The prehistory of this comet, so fateful for the Earth, which also brought the satellite, the Moon, over here, the fragment of a small planet from a very distant solar system. So, not only Venus, but also the Moon was brought here to our solar system. The Moon was also brought in by the destroyer. The Earth's moon, which originates from a small planet 4.5 million years older than the Earth. It was millions of years ago. Deep in the unknown space, in a space-time shifted solar system of the Milky Way, a solitary star floated far away from the normal orbits of the satellites orbiting the Sun. It was a dark star, devoid of any life, very dangerous in its unpredictable path, into which it had been flung by an immense eruption of its original sun. This was then its original sun burst through all shaking explosions and, in its destruction, partially destroyed the satellites orbiting it, or hurled them as dangerous projectiles into the dark space. The sun itself then collapsed into itself and tore a hole in the outer space. Its material pressed itself together with monstrous gewalt and was compressed into a small mass. While the sun, in its normal pulsating state, had a diameter of 11 million kilometers, it now shrank down to a concentration of only 4.2 kilometers. As a result, the material was compressed in such a way that a single cubic centimeter weighed several thousand tons. So our sun is about a little less than 700,000 kilometers in diameter, and this sun was 11 million kilometers in diameter and shrank down to 4.2 kilometers. So this is extreme compression, and just imagine like a cubic centimeter weighing several thousand tons. Since then, it has hovered in space as a dark, gaping hollow which tears everything within millions of kilometers of its perimeter into itself, whatever it is capable of seething and what falls under its spell. The dark star, which got flung away by it at that time, got caught again in a neighboring solar system and orbited it in an unpredictable path. In the field of the force of the huge sun, it orbited the sun's satellites for many millennia, as well as the sun itself, testifying to the fact that it would sometime cause a catastrophe to fall upon the system. Yet still far away from the actual worlds, the dark planet, bare of any life, roamed through space. Powerfully and unapproachably, it drifted through the icy cold of the universe, as an outcast, as a wandering planet, as a stranger in a foreign system, dark, dangerous, and deadly. Within the hold of the far outstretched force arms of the sun, it came closer and closer over the course of thousands of years to the actual area of the system of satellites, which it had already been orbiting for such a long time at an ever-increasing speed. Imperceptibly, however, its course always became narrower, and year by year the extent of its danger grew. After the thousands of years, it then rushed suddenly and unexpectedly into the closest sphere of influence of the sun and its planets. Like a greedy monster, it emerged from the blackness of the universe and announced deadly destruction. Initially, it was only like a silhouette out of nowhere, but then it was recognized in a hazy and blurred way as a half-dark round disk. Now already illuminated by the reflecting rays of the sun, it approached the orbit of the outermost planet at tremendous speed. But it was still millions of units away from the actual hearth of the peaceful calm, which, though, due to its gigantic size, it soon had to transform into a seething hell, once it penetrated into the silence of this harmony. But still some time went by at first, until the giant finally strayed from its path and had moved into the most dangerous proximity. Now already recognizable as a round sphere, the destroyer reflected the sunlight while dragging a fine veil of luminous particles behind it. Still only a few hundred units away from the next worlds, it evoked hellish storms in these, which destroyed large areas that had been cultivated by the human beings peacefully emerging there. With trembling for their arduously gained goods and their already hard life, they suddenly found themselves exposed to the immense and uncompassionate forces of the universe. Helpless, doomed to be handed over from life to death, they stared out into the sky to the gigantic wandering planet which raced towards them as a cosmic mortal projectile. It was no more than a question of time before the forces of the cosmos had to unfold their monstrous powers. On the night of the third day after the incursion of the destroyer into the planetary pathways, the middle of the night may just have passed, the drifter from outer space entered the elliptical orbit of the sixth planet. Causing immense cosmic storms, it flung the planet belonging to the orbit a few units off its direction and brought it on a dangerous course towards the sun. Monstrous eruptions and storms tore apart the peaceful appearance of the planet, thriving in its magnificence. Letting mountains collapse and casting seas out of their beds, it sought a new path around its sun for itself. Full of horror and consternation over the immense forces of nature, the human beings fled into the vast plains that covered the planet in great numbers. But the unleashed forces of nature were stronger than the will and the saving idea of the human beings. 2/3 of the humankind that inhabited the planet was killed and destroyed in the unleashed hell of nature. Wild waters tore away large parts of the mainland, while exploding volcanoes buried vast areas beneath glowing lava and turned them to rubble and ashes. The planet's daily rotation time doubled, and it circumnavigated the sun in the opposite direction. Just think about that a planet can be pulled in the opposite direction around a sun by a passing comet. This is just incredible power that are there exerted, and that some of them survived that is quite amazing on that planet. Forced by cosmic determinations, the survivors had to find a new beginning, devoid of any culture, set back to a primordial time of the development. The destroyer, however, continued racing through the system, spreading hell, death, and destruction. It crossed the path of the fifth planet, a world that was about to give birth to first life. Fortunately, at the time of the event, the latter was too far away from the point of crossing its orbital path to be seriously affected. Apart from mighty storms and minor quakes on land and at sea, there were no notable incidents on it. The fourth satellite of the system, however, would find its destruction in the Battle of the Worlds. At the smallest of the satellites, it stoically traversed its orbit, and from the perspective on anticipatory calculations, it had to cross the flight path of the Wanderer exactly when facing it head-on. And that is exactly what happened. It got into the irresistible destructive power of the giant. Like two wild monsters, the two planets raced towards each other, a giant and a dwarf. But before both of them could collide, immense explosions tore the lifeless, dead dwarf planet apart. Its fragments were hurled out into the endless expanses of outer space. where they were captured as shooting stars or meteors by the forces of other stars and, burning up in their atmospheres, found their final end. Further parts of the dwarf were torn into the sun and were atomized. Other parts were torn into the destroyer and became there a part of itself. As if hurled by a giant's fist, one half of the dwarf planet shot away and through a dimensional gate created by the hands of highly developed human beings into the unending expanses of the Milky Way space towards a very distant target. This is the dimension gate through which also the Plejaren come. They're in a different, I call it space-time continuum, or actually it's a different dimension, and there are 7 dimensions existing parallel, but best to explain it is like they are in a different space-time continuum. Though they're in the same time as we are. It's just a different space within the space, you could say. Several times on its path, it got into the realm of suns and planets, was shaken, was hit by meteors and shooting stars, and thereby changed its shape. Already after a few centuries, it had reached an angular, roundish shape. It was dead and barren, however, covered by many small as well as huge deep craters, and was incapable of supporting life. By the forces of various systems, its speed was gradually slowed down, and it changed its course several times, until one day it was attracted by the sun of a system and broke into its sphere of influence. As dark, dead planet, it traversed all planetary orbits of the outer rings without causing any damage. It was not until the inner rings that it collided with some fragments of a destroyed planet, which nevertheless only tore deep craters into it. However, this caused its course to change once again slightly, with the result that it was driven parallel to the orbit of the second planet, which was already creating its first primitive life. A planet covered by large seas and dense primeval forests, primordial, deadly, and yet gruesomely fantastic. From this point in time, only 34 days were still to pass before the dwarf caught up with the planet, namely the Earth, and was held captive by it. The forces of the planet were sufficient to bind the dwarf to itself and let it circle around itself as a new satellite, on an ever-changing elliptical path. Since then, it has orbited the Earth as moon, 4.5 million years older than its celestial body. So the moon is 4.5 million years older than the Earth. Yeah, and was brought here by the destroyer. In the distant solar system, however, the destroyer continued to rage. Destroying everything in its path, it flung the planet closest to the sun with unimaginable force towards the sun, in front of which it destroyed itself at a millionfold distance by immense eruptions and fell into the sun as smallest fragments and atomized. The destroyer itself drifted by a few units from its old course and shot past the sun in dangerous proximity, back into the expanses of the space, in order to take the same path as long times before the small planet did. Consequently, it also passed the dimension gate created by technically highly advanced human beings and came into the space-time configuration of our Dern universe and into the area of the Milky Way, and thus also into the solar system. So it's not just that the destroyer brought the moon here, and she explained it with the moon first, and then she explains it now with the destroyer, how they came here into our system. But due to the unimaginable heat of the blazing sun, the surface of the dangerous wanderer liquefied, and the glowing substances and particles flung away by its racing speed created behind it a shining tail hundreds of thousands of units long, shining as bright as the destroyer planet itself, which had now become a deadly comet. Due to the zero cold of the universe, the surface of the wanderer quickly solidified again. But its illuminating power remained with it, as did the shining tail. Myriads and myriads upon myriads of smallest particles and substances have covered it ever since, inundating it and following it as long tail when it comes into the realm of a sun, shining and showing the beings of the universe the path of the comet. Due to the continuous sequence of meteor dust, particles, substances, and the corpuscular radiation of the sun, it will never lose its illuminating power again until one day it will fall victim to its destruction. It will still wander through space for thousands or further millions of years before it itself has turned into dust by the grinding particles, or it is captured and destroyed by a sun. But perhaps one day human beings will also destroy it, just as it has already destroyed milliard-fold lives. Millions of years have already elapsed since its emerging, and its course is still unpredictable. So this is like the key thing to survive in the cosmos, is to develop technology that you can move from planet to planet in case such a huge comet is coming, or that you develop even greater technology that you can divert a comet like that into a sun, which is much more difficult than many people might think. A small comet that might not be so difficult with nuclear weapons or so, hydrogen bombs, etc., to deflect it. But with a comet the size of the Earth or similar sizes, that is very, very, very difficult. Due to all sorts of cosmic forces, it often changes its course in the solar system quite unexpectedly, and endangers, among others, its unfinished solar systems of Jupiter and Saturn. If a planet reaches a certain size, you could say a critical mass, then it can ignite and turn into a sun. So Jupiter and Saturn could also have become suns if they had been bigger, and then we would have a double or triple sun system. But by and large, its dangerous path is that stable that it passes through the same planetary systems again and again over the course of 575.5 years, albeit with variations in the distance of up to 1 million kilometers. The humankind of the distant solar system, 2/3 of which were destroyed at that time, found a new beginning which was hard and full of privation. Nevertheless, in less than 9 centuries, the human beings built up a new civilization and culture, created and driven out of hardship arising from cosmic forces. The people succeeded in preventing further cosmic catastrophes and annihilations. Whatever. Through arduous research, work, and voluntary commitment to the very last one, they created plans for their new culture and for a far-reaching technology. Dwellings were built that could withstand the gewalt of nature, and generation after generation brought together their knowledge and skills. Their spirit and their consciousness and their knowledge refined themselves rapidly, and soon the succeeding generations had reached a technology which, without any imagination, defied all possibilities. And there came the time when the descendants flew out into the unending expanses of the universe in round, plate-like flying ships with beam drives. Other solar systems and planets were flown to and expeditioned. New worlds and possibilities opened up in order to transplant the people of the home planet, which had meanwhile become too small for the new humankind. The scientists, with their spacecrafts and abundantly provided means of all kinds and fantastic application possibilities, used the dimension gate known to them to reach the Milky Way area and explored the space for ever newer things. They found many new habitable worlds and solar systems, which they often made subservient to themselves, using their beam weapons in short, one-sided fights, in order to conquer them for the settlement of their race. However, apart from their horrendous material and gene-based technology, they also perfected their consciousness and their spirit, so that nothing which they wanted to experience remained foreign to them anymore. The use of their powers of consciousness became implicitly to them, and so they gradually raised themselves to rulers vis-à-vis their people. They called themselves kings of wisdom, with the word Yahweh, which is on earth translated as God. So God is nothing but a title and has nothing to do with superior being, which nobody can see, stuff like that. Far superior spiritually and in terms of knowledge as well as consciousness to the normal people, they soon dominated it in evil dictatorial form. Yet after centuries having grown tired of the godlike scientists, the people rose against them initially in silent revolution. Oppressed, however, by the spiritual and consciousness-based powers and by the tremendous knowledge of the gods, the people had to submit to their rulers. But the will for freedom made them secretly prepare for the fight. It glowed like a smoldering ember for 4 centuries, to flare up in the given moment as untamable wild conflagration. According to the earthly calculation of time, it was about 230,000 years ago when the Liberation War broke out. Evil battles covered many planets and much was destroyed. A scientist named Azael used the opportunity to make himself self-reliant and flee. Secretly, he managed to bring a large fleet of spaceships into his possession to man them and to flee under heavy acts of fighting. With 183 white bodies and almost 250 reconnaissance ships, with a total of 360,000 human beings on board, he fled from his home system. For years, they were restlessly roaming through the expanses of the space before one day they found a solar system that offered them opportunities to live far away from their home system. It took 300 years after they seized the planet because they created a new humankind. Afterwards, they settled on 2 more planets of their new home system to then again traverse the outer space while exploring. In doing so, they came across the system of the earthly sun. They settled here on 3 different planets, namely on the Earth, on Melona, and on Mars, and began with the building of a new culture. But the planets were still rather inhospitable and often hostile. So they left the planets again and paid them visits only now and then. When then on the second planet, the Earth, first intelligent life started moving, they came back and lived there. But in accordance with the human beings reflecting, power struggle broke out again and they left the Earth. From the new home planet, however, the development of the Earth was constantly monitored and expeditioned year after year. From time to time, it was tried again and again to settle the planet. Also, beings were deported to the Earth, and these were simply left to their fate without any technology and help. They became stunted, wild, and bestial. Then, finally, the time came when the major step was finally ventured. A certain culture was built up on the Earth, which lasted for several millennia. But again, greed for power broke out, and everything was destroyed. So the Earth fell again into its old existence. Then it took again several millennia before a new attempt was made, this time, however, no more in the sense of an actual expedition. On the home planet, once again differences of opinion arose because the scientists again elevated themselves to gods and subjugated the people in servitude. From this, it resulted that a group of scientists and other human beings who thought differently banded together and seized various spaceships. Almost 70,000 human beings fled and settled on the Earth. Their highest leader, Peligon, was freely recognized by all as Yahweh, God, and led a tight regiment. He had nearly 200 sub-leaders, each of whom was responsible for a special field of knowledge. They were, so to speak, sub-gods, or also called guardians. On the home planets, however, war broke out and much was destroyed again. But the human beings finally achieved the freedom and the peace. That has remained so ever since and will also never change again. According to the earthly time calculation, that was around 50,000 years ago. So she is talking about the history of the Pleiadians here at the end, certainly, where they established peace on Era and in the Federation 50,000 years ago, and have kept this peace ever since. Only on the Earth itself things were not always so peaceful, and many mistakes were made. And by one of these mistakes, the primal human races of the Earth were procreated, whose descendants still live today and are about to commit the same mistakes as did our ancestors. Billy. That is completely fantastic, Semjase. But how did everything go on then? I'm looking forward eagerly to it. Semjase, that I believe you readily, but as for today, I cannot tell you any more, because my time is up. Next time you shall come to know more. This is also an important contact report, because she, even though some parts are difficult to explain who was going where and on what planet, but it shows that how difficult it is to keep peace. Sometimes you can even keep peace for millennia, but then again, at some point, some people want to dominate the others and take power, and then everything goes down the drain again. So that is why it's so important that we establish peace, because only peace is the basis to evolve. And as she explained, knowledge was handed on or given on from generation to generation, and that gave them the possibility to develop the technology to go out into outer space and expedition new planets, find new planets in case you have to move, which is very, very difficult, even for the Pleiadian, because if you want to move hundreds of millions of people, even if you have large spaceships, it's a big project. So she tells us this history that we can better understand that what we are facing is generally a universal problem, and hopefully we learn from them and establish peace, a permanent peace. But the basis for that is that people change their thinking and that they realize that war is not an option. Never. And who wants war is always wrong. Only violence can be used to pacify, but then the weapons would have to be destroyed again, you know. So Billy is a kind of propagating a world peacekeeping force which would pacify any wars on the planet. But once everything is pacified, they would also destroy their weapons. So that is how you could really bring peace to Earth. But there is no consciousness for that right now. But you can think about it and maybe tell some other people about it, and that's how it can spread. Okay, that was the 5th contact report, and maybe you have to read it several times to understand it a little better. Even then, there will probably be things not really clear to you. Same with me. It's also that we have to investigate our history too. That's also part of the teaching, kind of. That they don't give all the information in exact detail, then there would be nothing to discover, and gaining knowledge and wisdom is a discovery process. So it's important for evolving that you learn to not only think for yourself, but also investigate for yourself and research for yourself and find out what the truth is. Okay. See you next time, maybe.